Something pretty interesting here for you today. I'm going to be working on my 06 Ford Ranger here, and the problem we're going to be addressing today is a leaky axle seal. Now we know this is an issue because underneath the truck here you can see that the brake drum backing plate, the wheel, a little bit of the axle, it's all covered in some kind of greasy looking fluid. And gear oil's got a pretty strong odor, pretty unmistakable, and that's what we can smell underneath here. So we pretty much know that that's definitely the problem. And so the first thing we're going to do is get the truck up on some jack stands and remove the wheel on the side that we need to replace the seal on. Also, at some point early on in the project, it's a good idea to see if you can get this differential drain bolt out. Because obviously, if you have no way to put fluid back in the differential, you probably want to think about what your best course of action is before actually draining it out. Next thing we want to do is remove our brake drum here. Now in my particular case, due to the fact that the brake drum's pretty well lubricated with all the gear oil, and the fact that the brake drums themselves aren't in the best of shape, I can actually slide this right off. Now in some scenarios it's not that easy due to the fact that the way the brakes are adjusted, sometimes they'll actually hold the drum on a little bit. The solution's relatively simple though. Basically what you need to do is take this little adjuster wheel and spin it with a screwdriver. You should be able to reach it through this little access port on the back of the brake drum backing plate. So now our axle's just held in by the C-clips, which are contained inside the differential. So in order to access them, we're going to remove all of our differential cover bolts. What I recommend doing is start at the bottom, work your way around, and don't remove all the bolts immediately. What you want to do is take the bottom 3 out, maybe even the bottom 5, and then leave the other ones in but loose. Then make sure you have a pan underneath, and what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to pry the bottom out and then slowly drain the oil out instead of having it come out all at once if you took all the bolts out. See, this is much more controlled doing it this way than if you were to just take all the bolts out and just have everything start draining out. You can see here now we've got our cover completely removed, and our next order of business is removal of this crosspin bolt. Now all this crosspin bolt does is travel through the carrier here, through this crosspin right here and into the other side. So what its purpose is just to keep this crosspin from sliding out. Now what the crosspin itself does is, among other things, it keeps the axles from being able to slide in too far. Because if the axles slide in too far, the C-clips will fall out and then the axles can come out. Now in this case that's what we want to do, so we're going to take this bolt out. Now, I recommend you exercise extreme caution when removing this bolt. And the reason being is I've seen these bolts break when they're coming out. And if this bolt breaks on its way out, it'll turn this maybe 2.5 to 3 hour job into a 2.5 to 3 day job. So what I would suggest is use a 1/4 inch drive ratchet on this. Don't use anything too big so you can't put too much torque on it. And if it seems like it's taking a lot more power than it should to get it out, I would try spraying it down with some penetrating fluid, maybe tap on the carrier a little bit. Whatever your tricks are for stuck bolts, I'd use all of them because you do not want this thing to break. Fortunately for us, this one's compliant and it pretty much came out with any problem. So we'll remove our crosspin bolt. Don't really need to take it all the way out, but I will. Take that out, get that out of our way. And now the crosspin itself will come right out. What you can do is, if it doesn't fall out on its own, is just reach around to the other side of the carrier and you should be able to push it out. Alright, now what I've just went ahead and done here is I've spun the differential around to the point that we can now see through into the side of it. Now you want to be very careful as you rotate it around, because if the crosspin bolt is removed, if you're not careful, if you just spin one wheel, what you end up doing is actually rotating the spider gears and they'll end up trying to walk their way out. So what you really need to do is try and rotate both wheels at the same time. Spin this side, maybe get a friend to help you and spin that side. So that way the whole carrier and spider gear assembly moves as one. Then you can come back out to your axle, and now you can see you could push this thing in and it goes in a lot further than it previously would. Alright, so now if we come back underneath the truck and you look up inside here, you can actually see the axle kind of peeking through now. Those are the splines right on the end of it there. And right next to those splines is the actual C-clip that we're looking to remove. And my method of choice for removing that is just coming up in with a set of needle nose pliers. It looks like this time I got lucky and it was lined up so I could just pull it out. If it doesn't want to come out, you might just have to rotate it one way or the other, and you could do that with a pair of needle nose pliers and then it should slip right out. Now there's nothing holding the axle in, so we should be able to go and pull it right out. Alright, so now we can see we've got access to our seal here, and now we have to get it out. Now there's a number of different ways of doing this. One way is with the use of a seal puller tool. However, I already attempted that and it didn't seem like it was going to work too well. This seal's been in there for quite some time. So I'm going to give my trusty slide hammer a shot, see what that'll do. Alright, so what you guys just saw there was a method I've used a number of different times with pretty much good success every time. And what I do is I got this attachment for my slide hammer where you can fit a screw into it and you can put different size screws into it. So I've got what I would refer to as medium size screw. And what I do is I just drill a hole into the seal itself, and the way it ended up working out is it's kind of between the two different layers of the seal there. And then you just feed the screw in and it bites pretty good. And I didn't even have to, sometimes you have to put a hole in the other side of the seal and pull it from one side a little bit, then get the other side, but I didn't even have to do that with this one. The only thing you do need to be very mindful of is what's behind the seal and what's next to the seal, because if you were to go too far outside on the seal, you could end up messing that surface where the seal presses into, and likewise if you go too far through the seal, you could end up messing your bearing up. So just two things to be aware of, but this is my method that I like to use. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and put our new seal in. And if we wanted to, we could replace our bearing now. I've elected not to do so, but hopefully it'll hold up. So we're ready to install our new seal now. So what we're going to do here is we went ahead and cleaned up the surface in here. Make sure there's no like surface rust or anything like that going on. So the surface is pretty clean in here. Got our new seal, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lubricate it with some of the old gear oil here. It's always a good idea to lubricate these seals as you're installing them. It helps them go in easier and it also prevents them from breaking, because if you're not careful here you can end up damaging the seal as you install it. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to take this and we're going to try and get it started as straight as possible. Now we don't need to push it in super far, we just want to get it to the point that it's started and then it's relatively straight. Once that's done, we're going to take a block of wood. This is just a 2x4. This one's a lot longer than it needs to be, but it'll get the job done. And our magic hammer. And we're going to start tapping this seal in. And the idea here is that we want it to go in as straight as possible. If necessary, what you can do is you can tap a little more on one side than the other if you feel like the seal isn't going in perfectly straight. Now ultimately what our goal is for the bearing seal to pretty much be flush with the axle tube here. And the board makes that easy because this 2x4 happens to be wider than whatever the axle tube diameter is. So if we just tap this thing in flat, we'll end up with a perfectly flush seal. Alright, next we're ready to go ahead and reinstall our axle. And so it'll just go back in exactly as it came out. And once you get to a certain point, you'll feel it may or may not engage with the splines. And if it doesn't engage, you just have to rotate slightly, and then it should go right in. We'll reinstall our C-clip. Then we're ready to reinstall our cross pin and cross pin bolt. Now in order to do that, we're going to have to rotate this carrier back again. And keep in mind, as I mentioned before, you can't just rotate one wheel in order to do that. An actual demonstration of what I'm talking about. I've got to rotate it around to the point where you can actually see the cross pin hole. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hand here and I'm going to start rotating just the one wheel. And if you look through that hole, you can see what's happening is that spider gear is rotating and it's beginning to walk out, and that's not what you want to happen. Now there's usually a trick here. If you only get it walked out a little way, if you take the wheel and you kind of bump it abruptly, you can see what happens is the whole carrier won't spin, but that spider gear will begin walking its way back. Now sometimes what you'll find is you'll get the cross pin bolt halfway in, but it won't want to go through the other spider gear, and that's usually due just a slight misalignment. And so what you want to do is just take your wheel and just bump it just a little bit, and then it'll usually go through. Looks like this time it went through almost all the way. We got to go just a little bit more with this wheel. And now it'll pop right through. It actually went too far. Now I'm reinstalling the cross pin bolt here, and as I do that, I will make the suggestion it is worth putting a new cross pin bolt in and not reusing the old one. The reason being is that they're pretty cheap from the dealer. I think they're about $5. And even though it's $5 for a real small bolt, I say it's worth it. Because in the event that your old bolt is stressed for some reason, just from the fact that it's old, you could end up breaking it if you ever have to take it out again, even if it didn't break this time, and that's not worth saving $5 in my opinion. Alright, I just reinstalled my differential cover. Of course I cleaned it out beforehand, and some people use gaskets for these. You can buy pre-made gaskets. I didn't bother getting around to that, so I just used RTV. So what I've done is I've tighten the ball in a star sequence just to the point where the RTV is starting to squeeze out. I'm going to let it sit for an hour and then we'll come back and tighten it up. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and try and clean some of the grease out of these brake shoes here, and then we can reinstall our drum and reinstall our wheel. Of course, this is a good time to redo your brakes if you need to. Alright, we got our wheel back on. Cover's tightened up all the way now. The only thing left to do now is fill our differential up with fresh fluid and we'll be good to go. I've got this little handy device here that works pretty well. It's a little bit slow if you got to do more than just add fluid, but it definitely gets the job done. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pump this thing up until we get fluid just starting to drip out, and then we're good to go. Alright guys, that's going to be the end of this project here. I think we got some severe weather on the way, so I think we finished up just in time. As always, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you guys got any questions, leave them down in the comments. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.